The Toronto Raptors exited the Cooper Flagg Sweepstakes early last year when they opted to trade OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam. Still, they did not get picks back as the main point. They got back still serviceable players like Immanual Quickley, RJ Barrett, Bruce Brown, and Kelly Olynyk, while holding on to the likes of Jakob Poeltl whoops, despite numerous suitors. And that is the worst possible start because I was trying to read the description of this video and that's botched. Look, great things come in threes, and I believe that we've been on a bit of a heater. In my opinion, we had two very good lives, which I think really gave gave some insight into what the Raptors are trying to do. And this live is going to be no different. I believe that the Toronto Raptors are not going to tank, and I'm going to prove to you why in this video. Why they're card counting, what the science of tanking is. I'm going to show you data points and show you exactly why the 2019 odds flattening for the NBA draft and the draft lottery system has made tanking nearly impossible. I'll show you what types of players actually contribute to winning and why the Toronto Raptors are too good to tank right now, despite numerous people wanting this guy. Um, and numerous people pointing to the fact that the Raptors only have this guy because they tanked. The truth is that the Toronto Raptors are not tanking right now. And there are numerous signs to that. The fact that they extended Kelly Olynyk, the fact that they still have Jakob Poeltl, despite the fact that the Memphis Grizzlies wanted him and several other teams, OKC Thunder, called about him. If you're looking to tank, you cannot possibly keep your roster nearly as good as the Toronto Raptors are. And frankly, there are bloodbaths going on in the East right now. The Chicago Bulls have torn it all down. There are other teams that are simply just very bad, and they have done very little to improve their odds of getting any better. Teams like the Detroit Pistons. Do you think Tobias Harris is going to carry that team out of hell? No, he is not. And even if you can argue that some of these teams will be a little bit more competitive, the Toronto Raptors still have to face a lot of very bad teams several times. So it's going to make the odds of actually getting the number one pick or the number two pick or the number three pick. I understand a lot of people were watching VJ Edgecombe right now. People are psyching themselves up on Ace Bailey and Cooper Flagg highlights and maybe even looking at Dylan Harper. I understand the appeal. I get it. But at the end of the day, the Toronto Raptors don't think the way the Detroit Pistons do. That's why they do not have 13 and 10-year, playoff droughts. That's why they didn't have a 16-year drought. And frankly, there's a lot on the line here. Namely, you see Immanuel Quickley working super hard right now. You see Scotty Barnes working super hard right now. You cannot take the incentive away this quickly. You must put in the work and then pivot when required. Okay, so here's where we're at. First little plug-in. It is 4 a.m. Thank you to the several of you who are up right now. I understand we have fans in Europe and Asia who are populating the chat right now. So thank you guys for that. And to those of you who are interested in supporting the channel, of course, hit like, hit subscribe. And, if you feel like going away from the YouTube stuff for the super chats and stuff, there's a link in the bio for etransfers. And yeah, if you want to help out, that would help tremendously. We had a great month last year. We're going to have a great month again this year. I do believe that great things do come in threes, and I wanted to complete this sort of thought experiment or thought that I was having, moving away from talking about agents and moving towards team building. Again, the response was incredible to the last video. We haven't really seen such a huge subscriber growth from a live usually. Our subscribers usually coming from videos. So I thought it was a great time to cap the 24 hours. The first live in this sequence was at 5 a.m. yesterday, and this live is happening at 4. So that means within 24 hours, I will have completed the trifecta, and this video will not be super long, but it will be super detailed. Let's start with the flattening of the lottery odds. This is what I'm going to show you. So in 1990, right, if you look at this carefully, and feel free to come back to it if I move past it too quickly, in 1990, the square, that was, the second line that you see, that's where the lottery odds were in 1990. In 1994, you saw those odds get very high, and this made tanking very profitable for teams. Okay. And then they stayed there until 2019. Some of those picks, right? LeBron James, Yao Ming. You look at some of the terrible drafts, but there are also some really good drafts in there. The Allen Iverson draft, right? The Tim Duncan draft. And of course, if you were the worst team in 1996, your odds of attaining the first overall pick were 25%. And those are really great odds. If you're the second worst team, it was 20%. If you're the third worst team, it was 16-ish percent. Right now, those odds don't look nearly that good. And if you start looking at the flattened odds between, the first, second, and third team, it's all 14%. Now, this is also why you have to consider math when you're thinking about this. People point to the fact that the Detroit Pistons have had the worst record in the NBA 3 years in a row, which is not true, but they often misspeak and they say they have had the worst record in the NBA for 3 years in a row. It's actually 2 years in a row, and they got the fifth pick. Well, when you study the math on this, actually, the worst team's most likely outcome is actually number five. If you're the worst team in the NBA next year, your best case odds are actually the fifth overall pick. You have a 47% chance of ending up at fifth. This is how Adam Silver and the NBA are dissuading teams from bottoming out and tanking. It's bad for business. And I'm not going to wax poetic because I did that at the end of the last live in terms of why you shouldn't do it. Instead of waxing poetic and giving you the entire spiel about what it does to your organization, what it does to your fan base, what it does to your business, what it does to agents, what it does to future contracts, what it does to current asset value, consider what's happening with Gary Trent right now. I'm actually just going to show you the math on this because it's pretty undefeated. So the these are the last six drafts. So this is since the odds were flattened. And take a look at the Atlanta Hawks. They were the winningest team to win the draft lottery in the last 6 years. So since these odds were flattened, and frankly, they were flattened precisely so a team like Atlanta would have a chance to win. The Atlanta Hawks were the 10th team. The Spurs were the third team. The Magic were the second team. The Pistons were the second team. The Wolves were the third team. And the Pelicans were the seventh team. In those years, the teams with the worst odds were Pistons, Rockets, Warriors, Knicks. Notice how none of those teams ever got the first overall pick. Now, I think that it's important to realize that there are still some advantages to tanking, and perhaps if the Raptors wanted to tank, they needed to do certain things differently. As I alluded to in the intro, OG Anunoby had to be traded for expirings and picks, not players as good as Immanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, who are at worst top 100 players in the NBA. Kelly Olynyk, that trade that the Raptors made, trading away Kyra Lewis and Otto Porter for Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji, that trade could not have happened. Consider also the Toronto Raptors drafted two rookies that actually have the potential to not be terrible. They drafted Jonathan Mobo and they drafted Jamal Shed. You could also argue that Jakob Poeltl is probably a little bit more NBA ready than someone like Pacom Dadier. If you really wanted to tank, then banking on production in your draft picks, which is something that Darko Rajakovic alluded to in the Serbian interview that he did, where he said we're looking for young players who can contribute right away and maybe win a little bit. Well, certainly you're not looking for that in 23 and 22-year-old draft picks if your goal is to bottom out. You definitely pick a guy like Yves Missi over a guy like Jakob Poeltl if your goal is long-term development, because Yves Missi is probably 2 years away from being a real guy because he's going to have all these strength issues as a center. But the Toronto Raptors didn't do that. They went for guys who had a chance to at least be good next year. And don't rule out Jakob Poeltl being a 10, 12 point per game sniper off the bench and just rapidly accelerating his growth curve. That's what the Toronto Raptors hired all this. That's what they hired this development staff to do. It is to accelerate this growth curve. But you look at a guy like Jonathan Mobo at 31, and you had a person, ideally, in an ideal world, you would say, if you're comparing the upside of a Jonathan Mobo at 22, where he's gone through versus someone like Johnny Furphy, who's easily 2-3 years away, the Raptors clearly like Johnny Furphy. I mean, I can tell you on good authority that they did. Why go for Jonathan Mobo over Johnny Furphy if your goal is not even to compete next year? I think this all comes down to where the Raptors see their timeline. I think their timeline is starting now. Some people who have maybe a lot less belief in Immanuel Quickley and Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett, Jakob Poeltl, Kelly Olynyk, and all the guys that they have in this team, and perhaps the asset base that the Raptors have accumulated with Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, etc. I think that they believe that the Toronto Raptors will start being competitive in like 2027. And I think a lot of people, whether they want to admit it or not, and I think that there are a couple of publications, very big ones in the Raptor space, that hold this belief privately, but because they have been so ostracized and so criticized for holding this belief publicly, they have chosen now to sort of hold this belief privately. And that belief is that Scotty Barnes is not a number one option. I promise you that this is true. I promise you that they actually believe this. I promise you that him making an all-star team last year did not change their mind on this. And they believe that trading Pascal Siakam and making Scotty Barnes the figurehead is a temporary fix. That ultimately, if this team is going to be competitive in the future, that the only goal is to tank next year, that they must tank next year, that Scotty is a complementary piece, and eventually he will be second fiddle to someone like Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey or Cooper Flagg or something like that. I think Scotty is a nice piece to have, but not the permanent piece. They're treating him a little bit like Andrea Bargnani or Chris Bosh, like a placeholder, you know? Chris Bosh, not even, because they kind of got behind the idea of building around Chris Bosh, at least for the interim. They got behind it. So really, this is a little bit like, I don't know, building a team around Jordan Poole for them, right? Maybe that's a little too aggressive. The point is, they're not seeing Scotty the way the Raptors are seeing Scotty Barnes. The Raptors just put Scotty Barnes at the top of the 2021 draft, which is where he belongs. Now, one of the most important parts of this entire evaluation is understanding where value comes from in the draft. You know, it's also understanding the theory of card counting. And that's really what this is. The Raptors are card counting in Vegas. So, what are we talking about when we do that? Okay, look, the whole point of card counting is shifting odds, right? If the Toronto Raptors start the season 0-0, they have to consider the odds of Cooper Flag on one side and the playoffs or the play-in on the other side. Once they make the playoffs or once they get better, they'll have to consider the odds of potentially doing anything of merit in the playoffs. However, the minute the record goes to 0-1, you start shifting towards Cooper Flag. 0-2, now you start shifting. A big injury, now you start shifting. But you can't get there until you get there. You have to wait until the odds start to change. Consider the alternative. Let's say the Toronto Raptors start the season out 10-4 because they have a really soft schedule. Well, now the odds have moved towards playoffs, and your odds of getting Cooper Flag are even worse. At this point, you will need to adjust. You will need to change strategy because the Raptors don't want to be the 11th team or the 10th team and bounce in the play-in. They would rather be 7th than 10th, and they'd rather be 15th than 12th. That's what I'll say. They want to commit. And ultimately, some teams are not going to be able to shift out. If the Phoenix Suns next year start out a season 2-10 because of chemistry issues or because of a big injury, they can't shift because they have no flexibility. The Toronto Raptors pride themselves on having flexibility. This is what they did when they traded for Thaddeus Young. Some of us were not very happy with that, but they traded back 10 spots in order to give that core a little bit extra juice and a chance in the playoffs. What was the result? They lost in 6 games to the Sixers. But you, as an organization, got to see Scotty Barnes, albeit an injured Scotty Barnes, in the playoffs, and it reinvigorated some spark. Eventually, you traded for Jakob Poeltl. Same thing. You traded assets to shift direction. This year, it might be the complete opposite. Instead of trading for a piece, you might trade away a piece if you are in the opposite direction. There's no 2 timelines to satisfy. You're building around a 22-year-old who in a month will be 23 years old. Okay? In less than a month, Scotty Barnes will turn 23. Jakob Poeltl is the elder guy in this quote unquote core, but he's not a part of this core. You're building around a 23-year-old, a 24-year-old, and a 24-year-old. And by the way, all of them, if the redrafts were to happen today, would be lottery picks. What is a lottery? Well, let me ask you a question. If next year the Toronto Raptors draft first, what is your objective with the first overall pick? It's to get the best player in the draft, right? What's your reasonable expectation, though, that the first overall pick is the best player in the draft? I'm going to go through some history here and I'm going to show you why this doesn't work as easily as most people think it does. Let me just hypothesize that you have the eighth overall pick. Let's just say the Raptors end up with the eighth overall pick. I think a lot of people think that that means you're probably going to get something close to the eighth best player in the draft, right? Okay. So if we did a 2020 redraft, right? Is there a really, really good chance that James Wiseman doesn't go in the lottery? I would almost bet my life that James Wiseman's not a lottery pick. So at that point, the second overall pick, right, which was James Wiseman, I believe the 2020 draft, right? Am I mistaken? It's the year before Scotty or the year after Scotty? Yeah, it was the 2020 draft. 2020 was Anthony Edwards, then James Wiseman, right? Yes. So you would assume, right, in 2020, the Warriors with the worst odds, right? Timberwolves end up getting it because they jump from 3 to 1, right? So you imagine that draft happens exactly in that order. Now, allegedly, the Warriors told Anthony Edwards they wouldn't pick him first. If they had the pick, they wouldn't pick him first. They made that clear to him. And apparently that was a very big motivating factor, which means they would have picked James Wiseman first, which also means, and another way to say it, is they would have picked probably the 30th or 29th best player in that draft at number one. Where would OG Anunoby go in a redraft? Where would Pascal Siakam go in a redraft? So I know that the Toronto Raptors got a lot of credit, or maybe buzz, or maybe it was a little funny quirk that the Toronto Raptors were the only team in NBA history to win without a single lottery pick on their roster. Not the 15th guy, not the 16th guy, nobody. They actually traded away a whole bunch of lottery picks for non lottery picks because the non lottery picks were better. Fifth overall pick, Jonas Valanciunas, and was a considerably worse player than second round pick Marc Gasol, right? Ninth overall pick, DeMar DeRozan, is a considerably worse player than 15th overall pick, Kawhi Leonard. So let's take a look at the draft lottery. This is the last draft lottery, okay? And you're really going to want to focus on this because I've highlighted in the last I went through 2023, 2022, 2021, and then I went through 2014 and 2007 just to kind of test the hypothesis that this is generally true a lot, okay? This is the 2023 draft. This was a good draft. Okay. The 2024 draft will not yield a single Victor Wembanyama. It'd be very lucky to yield a single Brandon Miller. It'll be very lucky if it yields even an Amen Thompson. So this was an abnormally weak draft that we just had. However, we will see what happens with this draft. This draft, I want you to look at the third column, which is win shares. Okay. Sorry, the fourth column from the right, which is win shares. The best win shares to the worst win shares, when I sort for it, look what happens. This is what happens. The highlighted players are the top 8 players in the draft. Now, this is very early. Bilal Coulibaly and Jarris Walker are certainly prospects I still believe in. Brandon Miller is going to climb this list very fast. Anthony Black didn't play a lot because he was on a really good team. Asar Thompson, if his jump shot ever comes around, I'm sure he'll get a lot more next year. He's going to have ample opportunity. Victor Wembanyama, almost pointing single-handedly to why win shares are such a stupid stat, right? I mean, come on. Victor Wembanyama was amazing. He posted a 5.2 box plus minus. But I'm not using box plus minus because I'm ultimately talking about win shares here because ultimately the goal is to win, right? If you're trying to build a championship, at some point you're going to have to win games to get there. You're going to have to win 16 games in the playoffs to win a championship. So I'm going to use win shares throughout just to be consistent and throughout eras just to be consistent. This is what happened. The number one win share guy was the 12th overall pick. The number 2 win share guy, ironically, was the 57th overall pick, and that was Trey Jackson Davis, a senior. This year, let me tell you, the number one win share guy could be, let me guess. I'm going to guess who the number one win share guy is going to be. Is it going to be Reed Shepherd? It might be Reed Shepherd. It might be Stephon Castle. It might be Matas Bazelis. No, not Matas Bazelis. Who's going to be the number one win share guy? Could it be Dalton Connect? If he ends up carving like a huge rollout with the Lakers, could it be him? He's pretty NBA ready, right? Just like Derek Lively was pretty NBA ready. it really could be anyone. I wouldn't be surprised if Jonathan Mobo, if he gets an early crack in the rotation as a 31st overall pick, is top 5. So at least for 1 year, you'll get the value of the 5th best player in the draft, right? Okay, let's go back to 2022. Now this includes 2 years, okay? With the exception of Chet Holmgren, all of these players have played 2 years. Do you see how this is gonna break down? Now, if I sort this for win shares, it looks like this. Now, that looks really, really similar to the last one, right? That looks pretty similar. I mean, it's even worse because I had to I basically the more blurry it gets, it's deliberate. I mean, if you're looking at this on your phone, you're just like, wow, are those ants? The point is not that. The point is this is where the top 8 picks ended up in terms of win shares. The number 1 guy in terms of win shares was the 12th overall pick, and that's Jalen Williams. Number 2, this is gonna hurt Raptor fans, it was Walker Kessler at 22. Number 4, it was the 13th overall pick, and that was Jalen Duren. So, really, a lot of these players, including number 5 pick Jaden Ivey, Jaden Ivey's the 36th player in terms of win shares. Oh, don't worry. The 2021 draft, this is going to be even worse. This is that draft. And this is the Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley, Jalen Green, Cade Cunningham draft, which is considered the best draft since 2003. So they spoke just as well about this draft, and they're speaking about 2025 and 2026, frankly. They called this draft generational. They said Cade Cunningham was going to be the next Luka Doncic. Let me show you how this draft turned out. Yeah, it's even worse, okay? Davion Mitchell, that senior from Baylor that we talk a lot of shit about and that I'm super not excited about, he was 25th in terms of win shares in this draft despite playing on one of the best teams that has ever been in the lottery over the last 2, 3 years. Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, and Franz Wagner, the 3rd, 4th, and 8th overall picks in this draft. They are the guys who led this draft in win shares and continue to. 4th is 35th overall pick Herb Jones. 5th is Trey Murphy the 3rd. Now, I'm going to point to a really interesting trend. Can you tell me what you're noticing about this graphic? Hold on. This graphic, and this graphic. Can you tell me what you're noticing? Anyone out there? What I'm noticing is Detroit's players are always worse than their draft pick. Asar Thompson was the 5th overall pick, but he was 9th in win shares, right? Here, we have Jaden Ivey as the 5th overall pick, but he's 36th in win shares. And here we have Cade Cunningham as the 1st overall pick, but he's 38th in win shares. Cade Cunningham just signed a $225 million contract. That's pretty much $250 million. And across 138 games, he has managed to register fewer win shares than Delano Banton in twice as many minutes. He has managed to register 1 win share. That is return on equity that the Detroit Pistons have gotten for the 1st overall pick. Now, obviously, again, win shares are not gospel. You can look at his boxes minus. You can look at anything. You can watch him play. You can be very, very old school about this and say, oh, he does this and that. But the truth is, winning is why you tank, right? According to the thesis that you tank so that you can be better, everyone wants to point to the Spurs, but the Spurs are a great organization. They have only ever tanked ethically. They don't ask their players to sit out. They traded away the players or the players were injured, right? But they found value everywhere else too, right? They developed the 28th pick like DeJounte Murray. They developed a 15th pick like Kawhi Leonard. They developed a 28th or 27th, 28th pick, 29th pick like Tony Parker. They developed a 2nd rounder like Manu Ginobili. They drafted guys all over the place. They got an undrafted guy like Danny Green. Where did they find Derek White? He was also like pretty late pick, right? All these guys developed. George Hill. I mean, gosh, all the players that have developed through the Spurs system throughout the years, right? But they have a ton of lottery picks that haven't worked out recently. Josh Primo was a lottery pick, didn't work out, right? Jury is still out on Jeremy Sohan at this point, but he's probably not going to be much more than a role player. Certainly not worth throwing away an entire season for. And I'm going to ask you, look at the players the Spurs sent out, right? To get Victor Wembanyama is, okay, fine, that's worth it. You squandered 15 years to get that guy, but that guy's not coming around twice. Okay, he's not coming around again for the next 10 years. So You trade away Derek White, who was an instrumental part of a championship. You traded away DeJounte Murray, who just netted the Hawks, Dyson Daniels, a lottery pick, 2 first-round picks, and a really, really good player in Larry Nance Jr. So you traded that away, Derek White, right? DeJounte Murray, Derek White, DeMar DeRozan, who's been consistently one of the top 50 to 60 players in the NBA for the last 4 years since he left. That's what you traded away. And you traded away Jakob Poeltl, a guy who, allegedly is one of the top 15 centers in the NBA, according to this front office. So you traded away all these players in order to get players that didn't really work out. And if you don't hit on Victor Wembanyama, if the lottery odds did not fall your way, okay, and they might not have, you had the second best odds and you won. That should not be considered some sort of historic win because right now, if the Spurs had gone second and drafted Scoot Henderson, we're saying you just wasted 6 years, 7 years, 5 years. I don't know. Since they traded Kawhi, basically, they've been tanking for 5 years. You cannot bank all the hope on this. Okay. Now, just because, I'm sure someone's going to be like, yeah, Rob, limited sample size. Go back to 2014. The same trend will continue. Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker were considered very, very, very good players coming out. And Joel Embiid, obviously, he was considered like a very good prospect. And I think a lot of people thought that those 3 were incredible. I remember the narrative in 2012 about how great a class 2014 was going to be. It's going to be one of the best classes ever. In fact, the 2014 class was considered to be the best class in almost 10 years. They also said this about this class. They said it's the best class since the Kevin Durant and Greg Oden class, which we'll talk about very soon. So this was a very good draft class. It was nothing like the 2013 draft class with Anthony Bennett, right? The only thing that these teams had in common, these 2 drafts had in common, is the Cleveland Cavaliers had a first overall pick and they picked a Canadian. They picked a better Canadian this time and they traded him right away to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Kevin Love. But I'll tell you right now, when you do this distribution, it ends up being almost the same again. It's almost the same again, right? When I sort for win shares, the second overall pick ends up at the 23rd slot, the 23rd spot. 8th overall pick, Nick Stauskas, who went to joke organization at the time, Sacramento Kings, he ended up 28th. Joke organization, Utah, post, Deron Williams, post Carlos Boozer, right? The Utah Jazz were really bad for quite some time. Dante Exum didn't work out. He had to go overseas to rehab his career. The Minnesota Timberwolves, again, not a good team, not a good franchise, right? Andrew Wiggins, the Maple Jordan or whatever he was called, right? Number 1 pick, 13th overall, despite now playing with Steph Curry. And I guarantee you, if he doesn't go to the Warriors and he stayed on that lowly, Minnesota team, he's probably even lower on this list, right? So who was the first? The 41st pick, Nikola Jokic. Why? Ended up in a great system, a system with a coach that really understood how to utilize him. Clint Capella is number 2. Number 2, Clint Capella in terms of win shares, which is crazy and points to just how much time Joel Embiid has missed. Clearly, Embiid is the second best player in this draft. You can make an argument that Clint Capella is like the 5th or 6th best player in this draft. You can make a case that Aaron Gordon and, guys like clearly win shares are going to value, highly productive bigs, but you could look at a guy like Marcus Smart, right? 6th overall pick. Marcus Smart is probably the guy that kind of just made sense. Marcus Smart and Aaron Gordon just lived up to their draft position, right? But what about a guy like Nick Stauskas, Dante Exum, Jabari Parker, right? And, you do have guys like Jordan Clarkson, who was the 46th overall pick that just really rose up. Joe Harris, 16th, but he was the 33rd pick, right? Your goal as an organization should be to make players better, not draft really, really, really enticing players and ruin their careers. Now, let's go back even further. Here's the 2007 draft, Greg Oden draft, Kevin Durant draft, Al Horford draft. Yi Jianlian was considered a very can't miss prospect. Oh my God, you should see him working out against chairs. It's great. This is where that draft ended up. The one draft so far that I can point to where all top 3 guys are actually lottery picks. Oh, no. Here, the top 3 guys are also lottery picks. So 2021 and 2007. But where were they picked? 2, 3, and 4. This is the most coherent that you could say a draft has looked to me. Jeff Green is pretty up there, but look at Yi Jianlian. Look at the injury ravaging of Greg Oden, Corey Brewer, Brandon Wright, and yeah, you have Marc Gasol, the 48th overall pick. He's fourth. Thaddeus Young, again, consummate pro, ended up in a process Sixers situation, but got out of there pretty soon, and that's where all those win shares built up. I guarantee you, we look at this when Thaddeus Young was still in Philly. Oh, it was so bad. Thaddeus Young has built up those win shares in Chicago, in Toronto, in Indiana. He built it up elsewhere. He didn't do well there. Joakim Noah, unfortunately, playing for Tibbs is not going to do you well. He had a shortened career, right? And he's currently in Cameroon right now and embracing his roots and doing a lot of really fantastic work. So big shout out and salute to Joakim Noah. But you have a guy like Jared Dudley, the 22nd pick, Carl Landry, 31st overall pick. I mean, these were serviceable role players. Marco Bellinelli, Wilson Chandler, Ramon Sessions, Rodney Stuckey. We remember all these guys. Tiago Splitter with the Spurs. There you go. Spurs, 28th overall pick. They love that area of the draft. The goal is not to get the best player. Sorry, the goal is not to get the highest pick. The goal is to pick the best player and to make them very productive and to win games. The goal should be this. This should be the goal. Sorry, this should not be the goal. This should be the goal. Nikola Jokic, Clint Capella, Dwight Powell, Kyle Anderson, Jeremy Grant, Spencer Dinwiddie, Yusuf Nurkic, right? This should be your goal. Finding value. And I guarantee if you look at where the Raptors have found value, it's everywhere. So the goal is not finding the value. The goal is extracting the value. Because you can draft Cooper Flagg and ruin his career. You can. You can draft a Dylan Harper, play him out of position, and ruin his career. You can totally draft these guys and you can burn your bridges. And maybe after 3 years, they're not happy anymore. They're not happy playing basketball. They're not winning. They hate their coach. They hate their teammates. That's what the Raptors were so afraid of 2 years ago when Scotty Barnes had his sophomore slump. It's too big an investment. The fourth overall pick is too big an investment to waste on Fred VanVleet's ego. That's the point. You can't blow these. Look at what the Golden State Warriors went through. James Wiseman, Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, point to the star, point to one star. Trace Jackson Davis, the 57th overall pick, literally outperformed the best year of all three of their careers combined as the 57th overall pick. 57th overall pick is a little disingenuous. He would have gone much, much higher had he not pushed his way to the Warriors. However, it is worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about when you petition for the Raptors to tank and you petition for the Raptors to be super bad next year. These numbers are what I'm talking about, and these numbers are what every smart executive is looking at. Because when you start to thread the odds, being the worst pick, being the worst team, makes your fan base like incredibly excited throughout the year. Like when you're bottoming out, some fans are super excited and they're very loud about it. Oh my God, Cooper Flagg, Cooper Flagg. There are guys coming to the game with Cooper Flagg jerseys and Cooper Flagg signs. You are ruining your existing roster in order to bet on hypothesis. Now, consider what's happening with Caitlin Clark right now, right? Just in case, to give you an insight into pro athletes and their ego and how things rub them the wrong way. I want you to think about it, right? You think Scotty Barnes thinks he couldn't kill Cooper Flagg in a one-on-one right now? You think Immanuel Quickley is scared of Dylan Harper? You think any of these guys really, like as pro athletes who really, really put in the time and grind to do what they've done with their careers so far, to outperform their draft stock as much as they have, you think these guys are like, oh, Cooper Flagg will save us? So how do you feel as an organization when you go up to them and tell them, you're not good enough? We want to tank for an entire year so we can add this guy. This is not a fun conversation to have. And it's a conversation that will frankly turn your players against you. And then you will have all the selfishness. Then you will have guys diverting their attention away from winning towards contracts and brand deals and stats. And that's where tanking kills your organization. Because if you cannot get a pro athlete to focus on winning, they will find something else to focus on. This is a human thing. This is always going to be a human thing. You brought in Darko Rajakovic to instill a new culture about winning, about team. The minute you start detracting away from that, you open the door to the same thing happening all over again. And now, guess what? Cooper Flagg comes into a completely dysfunctional organization and you ruin his career too. Teams must be aware of this. There are tons of scientific research papers and periodicals and whatever, like books written on this subject of the psychological impact of prolonged stretches of losing. And yet, time after time, teams do this. Why do they do this? Why do teams trade away really, really good players who have worked out for them for future assets? Why do teams bottom out year after year, strip their rosters completely bare, and then hand their entire organization, like the Pistons did with Cade Cunningham, to a 19-year-old and say, hey, 19-year-old who's not old enough to drink in the United States in any state, hey, 19-year-old who hasn't graduated college, hey, 19-year-old whose brain is still 6 years away from development, here are the keys to our franchise. Do something with it. I feel bad for Cade Cunningham. He was over leveraged in that position. There are very few organizations that are prepared to support a player in this new quest. And frankly, when you lose the way some people propose the Raptors should lose, you lose a lot of good people along the way. You lose good vets. People don't want to be with you. You lose agents. You lose favors. So all of this ties together. I am not saying the Raptors should not try to be bad next year. I'm saying you have to wait for that day to come when you can have that conversation. The Toronto Raptors, in my opinion, are going to do something over the next 2 weeks that is going to break a lot of people's minds who are currently going on podcasts and currently making videos about Cooper Flagg and how the Raptors are bottoming out and because they're so bad. The Toronto Raptors do not think about Scotty Barnes and Immanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett in the same way that The Athletic or Raptors Republic or any of these publications think about these players. They think of these players as really good players, just the same way. And just before you tell them that they're stupid and delusional and they're wrong, this is the same organization that saw a starting power forward in Pascal Siakam before most people saw a first rounder in Pascal Siakam. This is the same organization that saw a key backup guard in an undrafted free agent, Fred VanVleet. Sometimes you can't wait for the proof to see the vision. The vision is clear. The Raptors believe that Darko's system creates great looks, and they proved it last year, even through a turnstile roster, that what they're doing philosophically as a basketball team, even before they've actually installed their defense, actually generates some of the cleanest looks in the NBA. The dude can coach. Despite what some people say, despite what other content creators say, I promise you, as someone who has tried to study basketball as deeply as humanly possible and is obsessed with the game, Darko Rajakovic can coach. Okay. He's coaching circles around, other coaches. Now, I'm not saying he's the best coach in the league. There's all tons of deficiencies on his staff. And maybe even with him, he has to grow into this. But the system works. I'm also telling you that Scotty Barnes is probably going to be an all NBA player next year. You heard it here first. Did you hear it here first? Maybe you heard it here second. I'm going to proclaim that right now. I'm going to put it on record. I believe Scotty's going to be at least in the running for All NBA. He's going to get votes for All NBA next year. You have to understand that there's $45 million on the line for Scotty Barnes next year. That's not small money, okay? $45 million. The minute you strip this roster down, you are basically telling him, we will not support you in doing this. That we are asking you right now to show us, because that's the challenge right now. Just an FYI to anyone who hasn't figured this out yet. Darko Rajakovic, right now, the conversation with Scotty Barnes is simple. Work all offseason. We have handed you this franchise. Immanual Quickley, we have handed you money that you are not technically entitled to yet. Money that we have paid you like an all-star before you even come close to being an all-star. Prove us right. When you identify that there are certain people that respond well to this type of faith, you invest in them. When you find certain people who don't respond well to faith and become complacent, then you don't invest in them. I believe the Raptors have always operated with this idea of taking care of their guys, but ultimately, they also believe that faith is rewarded both ways. The Toronto Raptors have banked on Scotty Barnes becoming an All NBA player very soon. And I believe that soon is next year. They are banking on Immanuel Quickley to make a jump towards borderline all-star next year. And I believe, as much as he is somewhat not talked about enough, I think that RJ Barrett can be a very good part of that equation as well. They are banking on these guys to get better. If they get better, you can't tear this away, because the minute you're a 25 win team, no one is voting for Scotty Barnes All NBA. I'm going to say this to tie up the previous two videos. If you haven't watched those, definitely go watch those. And this video, all sum total. There's a lot of money on the line for Scotty Barnes, and there's a lot of money on for his agency. 270 million is they reported 270, right? They reported 270. That is contingent on him making All NBA. Him making All NBA is contingent on the Raptors being competitive. Nobody's giving Scotty Barnes All NBA on a 20-win roster that, where he was shut down for half the year. So at minimum, you're getting Scotty Barnes for 65 games next year, unless you can't shut him down either. You can never have that conversation. You will never, ever, ever recover that relationship the minute you do that. I know some of you don't want to hear that, but that's the reality of business. And don't pocket watch his money, because if someone tried to take $45 million away from you, you would be livid. So let's be real about this. You are not going to tear this roster down until they fail. When they fail, you can have that conversation. When they fail, I'm sure it will be a lot more palatable and digestible. But until they fail, you must assume they will succeed. You must plan like you're going to be a 50-win team. You must prepare to be a 50-win team. You have to prepare to be a playoff team. When it doesn't work, this is the same thing they did last year, right? Ask yourself the question, could they have traded Pascal and OG in the offseason and just completely, given themselves off the season? They brought in Dennis Schroeder. They knew the second they lost Fred VanVleet, they weren't going to make the playoffs, right? But they had to give them a chance. And some of us complained. I complained. I've grown. I hope you'll grow with me. Okay. A lot of the things that I've said over the last 2 years, honestly, if I knew better, I would have done better. I'm learning. Really, I'm evolving. I'm evolving my mind. I hope you'll evolve with me. I hope you can think about this a little bit differently. I hope this video has been a pretty good explanation as to why tanking doesn't work historically and in the modern NBA. And you know what? If you told me that next year, the best player in next year's draft in 5 years will be the 13th overall pick, and he'll be better than Ace Bailey and better than Cooper Flagg, I'll bet you there's one thing that's true about that player, that he went to a good organization. It matters. All right, 30 comments. I will respond very quickly. Ooh, wow. Whoa. That's nice. Super chats. Rob, I told you to get some sleep. Love from your two biggest fans in Korea. That's so nice of you. Thank you so much. Man, you gotta sleep. All the best though. Thank you so much, Sahil. And Bruce Brown for Keldon Johnson, question mark. Bruce Brown for Keldon Johnson. Yeah, I would do it in a heartbeat, but I don't think the Spurs are gonna do that. Also, like if you really think about it, the Spurs, they were not able to hold Victor Wembanyama out of games last year. They probably would have tried, but they're not going to burn that relationship either. You really do have to you have to think. Oh, Jess Beast up. Kings fan here. What are your thoughts on Jalen McDaniels? We acquired him from you guys. Uh-oh. Oh boy. You don't want my thoughts on Jalen McDaniels, bro. My thoughts are that he is possibly one of the worst players in the NBA, and you're going to find that out pretty quickly. I hope you guys can do better with him, though. I really do. I don't have a lot of faith, though. He's 26 years old, going on 27. He's nothing like his brother. He is a really, really inconsistent player. I don't believe that. I think he's a little bit overrated as a shooter. You're probably going to see him. He shot 40% with the Sixers. That did not translate. His numbers are not lying to you, though. He really was the worst player on the Raptors last year. And frankly, I am shocked beyond my mind that we got multiple draft picks for him, as well as two players who are better than him. If you want my honest opinion, here's me ranking all the assets that came back in this. Okay. The worst asset in all of this, the worst asset in this entire trade was Jalen McDaniels. The second worst asset in this trade was probably Davion Mitchell. The third worst asset was Sasha Vezenkov. You can really swap those two. The second worst asset, or the second best asset in this case, was the 45th overall pick. The best asset in this entire trade was the Portland second rounder in 2025. So if you're doing the math there, the Kings traded the first, second, third, fourth best assets for the fifth best asset in a deal. You didn't do it for what you got back. You did it because it balances out your roster a little bit. It gives you a little bit more cap flexibility and it pushes you under the tax. That's it. That's the only thing. Um, Thank you so much, by the way, to all of you um, for supporting us. This was a really nice thing that came to my door, and over the past few weeks, there have been more and more of these little Amazon packages that are coming, and I can't wait to put it all together. Um, yeah, I'm gonna probably spend some time doing that. I would like to work on some videos. I love lives. I think they're great. I've been doing a lot of them lately. Some of them at crazy hours like this, where we've got super chats telling me to sleep, and I appreciate that. But I would like to get back to making videos. Videos are good for this channel. Videos are good for me creatively. And probably this week or so, before we get into all the summer league coverage and whatever, I think I've said a lot. I think, we've talked a lot. We've had a lot to say. And I really appreciate the comments that came to the last two videos. I know that some of you guys don't think that I read all the comments. I just heart them, but I do read them. I read all of them, negative, positive. I read all of them. I may not respond to all of them, but I do read them, and yeah, it's very meaningful to hear that this content is something that you care about, something that you learn from, something that makes you think. That's really all I've ever wanted, and yeah. So I want to say thank you. And before this video goes to an hour, because I like round numbers, I bid you all farewell. I hope that you have a great day, and to the Americans out there, happy Independence Day. To all of you, happy 4th of July, and to the Sacramento Kings fan in here, I wish you very good luck with Joe McDaniels, and I hope that he has a much better time in Sacramento than he did in Toronto. Have a great day, guys. Bye.